Good morning. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Samuel, and I'm going to look at one or two verses from the first two or three chapters of 1 Samuel, first book of Samuel. Samuel is a very interesting character, amazing to study the life of Samuel. If you don't know the story of Samuel, please do read the first chapter, particularly of how Samuel came to be born. But the story is that there was a man called Elkanah who lived in a place called Ramoth. It's actually called Ramathaim Zophim, but it's abbreviated to Ramoth in the rest of the text. He lived in this town, which if you know a bit about the geography, if you don't, find a map and have a look. Ramah was about 5 miles north of Jerusalem. And this was a period of time when Jerusalem was not the capital of the country that they'd settled. Jerusalem was still in the hands of Canaanites. It wasn't until David came that David took Jerusalem and established it as a capital. It became the city of David because he took it. At this time, this is before the first king was anointed. The first king was Saul, who Samuel anointed as king. And so the Ark of the Lord and the worship of the Lord was in a place called Shiloh, which was where Eli and his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests, and Eli was elderly, and they were in the place of worship in Shiloh. And Elkanah had two wives. One was called Hannah, and the other was called Peninnah. Hannah had children, and Hannah didn't have children. Peninnah had children. And there was enmity between these two women because the one that had children felt she was better than the other. So when you read the story of Samuel, don't put Samuel in the temple in Jerusalem because the temple hadn't been built and Jerusalem wasn't the capital yet of the country. And Samuel bridges the gap between the period when there were judges who arose at points of need and helped the people of God to free themselves from the tyranny of other nations. And Samuel is the last great judge, and he is the one who brings in the kingdom period and anoints the first king over Israel, the whole nation of Israel. So get the geography right in your mind. Here they are, this family. Every time there's a time to go to worship the Lord at Shiloh, Elkanah brings his two wives and his family to worship, and they have a period of sacrifice. And poor Hannah is childless, and she goes into the temple of the Lord. Now, we're not told when this temple was built. We're not told what it was like, but there was a temple of the Lord. It says it quite clearly in verse 9. When they'd eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed, and she asks the Lord for a son. She pleads with the Lord for a son, and Eli gives her a prophetic word after he thinks she's drunk to begin with. And she says, "I'm not drunk, I'm just desperate. I'm just crying out in my heart, and my mouth is moving with the crying of my heart." And he says to her, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you've made to him." And she receives that as a word from the Lord and goes home. And then she conceives. Back in Ramah, she conceives this child, and she brings the child, once she's weaned him, she brings him to the temple in Shiloh and gives him to the Lord. And then she goes home and she has other children. She's blessed with other children, which is wonderful. The Lord gives her other children. And then it says, that's in chapter 2, verse 21, the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters, and the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. Now, it's about Hannah I want to talk, really. She asked The thing she wanted more than anything else was a child. And she hadn't got a child. And God gave her the child, and immediately she gives the child back to God. That's an incredible thing to do. She had no guarantee she would have another child. In fact, she doesn't conceive again until she has weaned Samuel, until Samuel is old enough to be weaned and to be able to live independently of her. And she puts this young child in the care of Eli in the temple. And she goes every year with clothing for him as he grows. And then she conceives. And I think that is an amazing thing because, sometimes when we have our heart set on something we desperately want, and we plead with God for it, and it seems like we will never get it. And then we come to a place of thinking, actually, this thing that I'm wanting has become more important to me than my relationship with God. In fact, my relationship with God in some ways depends on him answering this prayer. I've almost made it conditional. Lord, if you will only do this thing for me, then I'll serve you the rest of my life. Well, God is not a bargainer. We can't bargain with him. And I know at least twice in my life, when something I've wanted and longed for has become so big that it's got in the way of my relationship with God. And I've come to the place where I've said, and it will usually be through reading the Word, perhaps reading Romans 12:1, perhaps reading something else, perhaps reading about Caleb, perhaps reading about one of these greats of the Scriptures. Come to the point of saying, Lord, I give it up. I leave it with you. I'm not going to ask anymore. I leave it with you. I trust you that if it's right for me, and if it never happens, I will still follow you. I'll stop pressing you for this thing. And the strangest thing is that when we give it up, God doesn't take it away from us. He actually grants our request because he sees our heart that has given to him the very precious thing, the most precious thing we've in our hearts. We give it back to him and we say, Lord, it's got too big for me. It's got in the way of my relationship with you. It's become too important. Nothing matters more than my relationship with you. Forgive me. Forgive me for pushing you and pressing you for this thing. And then she gets these 3 sons and 2 daughters. But I do believe that the Lord gave her back something else. And that I derive that from looking at chapter 7, verse 15, which talks about Samuel's ministry. He was a judge. He wasn't always in the temple in Shiloh. He was as he was growing up. And until he heard the word of the Lord, and the word of the Lord came to him, he was in Shiloh. But after that, he became a judge. And it says in chapter 7, verse 15, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah. And he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would come back to Ramah, for his home was there. And there also he administered justice to Israel. And he built an altar to the Lord there. And I think when you put this together with the previous passage, his mother's home was in Ramah. And when he was old enough and he received the ministry of the Lord and he had the word of the Lord and he became a judge, he had his base in Ramah. And so I think the Lord gave Hannah her son back when he was an adult. And he lived in his hometown and travelled round on a circuit ministry from there. And I think that's what the Lord does, Sometimes we have to do without a really precious thing for some time. And then the Lord, in his love and grace to us, gives it back to us. And he gave back, I believe, to Hannah, her son Samuel. and she was able to enjoy his company when he was an adult. But she gave him to the Lord. And we need to do that with our children and our grandchildren. They're not ours to keep. We give them to the Lord. We dedicate them to the Lord for his purposes in their lives. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.